"Your gift is trash, Dad. Just like you," my son shouted at his own wedding, throwing away a family heirloom. I nodded, placed a sealed envelope on the table, and said, "This was your real gift." When he saw what was inside, his world fell apart. Now he knows that some words come at too high a price. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The front door slammed against my hallway wall with enough force to rattle the picture frames. Gerald stood in my doorway, his expensive Italian leather shoes leaving marks on my worn carpet, his BMW's engine still ticking in the driveway. "Dad, I need another $15,000 for the wedding." His voice carried that familiar edge of entitlement mixed with desperation. "The florist raised prices, and Ruby wants additional arrangements for the ceremony." I set down my evening tea, watching the liquid ripple from the vibration of his dramatic entrance. My reading glasses slipped down my nose as I looked up at my son, 35 years old, wearing a wrinkled shirt that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "Gerald, I already told you. No." My voice stayed level, controlled. "I paid for your first 2 weddings. This time, you're responsible for your own decisions." He began pacing my small living room like a caged animal, his loosened tie swinging with each sharp turn. The contrast between us couldn't have been starker. Him in his designer suit, me in my comfortable cardigan and slippers, settled in the armchair that had been my refuge since Margaret passed. "You're just a cheapskate." Gerald's fist came down hard on my coffee table, making my teacup jump in its saucer. "You have that villa sitting there like some monument, and you live like a pauper." The accusation stung, but I reached for the teapot with deliberate slowness, pouring myself fresh tea. Steam rose between us like a barrier. "The villa is family heritage," I said, watching the amber liquid fill my cup. "It belonged to my grandfather, then my father. It's not for spending on your latest whim." "Latest whim?" Gerald's voice cracked with indignation. "This is my wedding, Dad. Ruby is different from the others. She's the one." I'd heard those exact words before, twice. Sarah had been the one until the divorce papers arrived 11 months later. Amanda had been forever until she walked away after discovering Gerald's mounting credit card debt. Gerald grabbed his BMW keys from my entry table, the metal jangling against his agitated movements. His face flushed red, the same color it had turned during his teenage tantrums. "You know what? Don't even bother coming to the wedding. We don't need your negativity ruining Ruby's special day." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a blown-out candle. 35 years of fatherhood reduced to this moment. Gerald stormed toward the door, then paused, his hand on the frame. "I'm done asking for your help," he said without turning around. "But don't expect me to come crawling back when you're old and alone in that precious house of yours." The door slammed again, harder this time. A framed photo of Margaret and me on our wedding day shifted on the mantel. Through my living room window, I watched Gerald's taillights disappear down Maple Street, the red dots growing smaller until they vanished completely. My hands trembled as I lifted the teacup to my lips, the china chattering against itself in the evening quiet. 2 hours had passed since Gerald's BMW disappeared into the night. I'd changed into my pajamas and made fresh tea, but sleep felt impossible. The photo album lay open on my lap, Margaret's face smiling up at me from our wedding day 42 years ago. "Margaret, our boy has completely lost his way," I whispered to her image, my finger tracing the edge of her veil. "What would you do?" Her eyes seemed to hold that same gentle wisdom that had guided our family through every crisis. I turned the page, finding photos from Gerald's childhood. Little league games where I'd cheered from the bleachers, science fair projects we'd built together in the garage, graduation day when pride had swelled in my chest like a balloon. Then came the wedding photos. Sarah's ceremony first, that elaborate garden affair in 2019. 200 guests, white roses cascading from every surface. A string quartet playing as she walked down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my car. I'd written that $45,000 check with genuine joy, believing this was the one, that Gerald had finally found his anchor. The divorce papers arrived 11 months later. Amanda's beachside wedding followed in 2022, smaller but no less expensive, with those ridiculous white chairs lined up on the sand. $38,000 that time, though I'd been more cautious, sensing the pattern forming. Amanda had lasted 2 years before walking away, frustrated with Gerald's job, instability, and mounting debts. I did the math in my head, an old engineering habit. 45,000 plus 38,000. $83,000 spent on relationships that barely outlasted their honeymoon periods. And now, Ruby wanted her turn at the Lawson family wallet. Rising slowly from my chair, my knees protesting the movement, I walked to the old safe behind Margaret's china cabinet. My fingers remembered the combination after all these years. 0428, Margaret's birthday. Inside, beneath insurance papers and old tax returns, lay the manila folder I hadn't touched in months. The villa's deed felt substantial in my arthritic hands, its legal weight matching its emotional significance. 3 generations of Lawson men had lived on that property, each adding their own improvements, their own memories. My grandfather had built the original structure with his own hands. My father had added the West Wing during the post-war boom. I'd modernized the plumbing and electrical systems during my engineering career. Maybe it was time Gerald learned what family legacy truly meant. I found a formal white envelope in Margaret's old stationery box, the kind she'd used for important correspondence. Sealing the villa documents inside felt ceremonial, final. The weight of the envelope in my palm represented 35 years of parenting, countless lessons unlearned, and one last opportunity for my son to understand the difference between earning and taking. Walking to my bedroom, I placed the sealed envelope on my nightstand, where I'd see it first thing every morning. Through my bedroom window, the villa's security lights twinkled in the distance like stars that had fallen to earth. My resolve crystallized in that moment, hard as the concrete foundation my grandfather had poured decades ago. I set my alarm for 6 o'clock. The wedding was in 8 days, and I had preparation to do. The alarm's sharp beeping cut through my dreams at exactly 6 a.m. Saturday, May 24th, Gerald's wedding day. The sealed envelope on my nightstand had remained untouched all week, a constant reminder of the decision that had grown stronger with each passing day. I chose my navy suit, the one Margaret had bought me for our 40th anniversary. Not flashy, but dignified, representing values that seemed increasingly rare in Gerald's world. My father's gold cufflinks caught the morning light as I fastened them, tiny anchors connecting me to generations of men who'd understood the difference between earning respect and demanding it. The drive across Pasadena took 20 minutes, early Saturday traffic light and predictable. Goldsmith & Sons occupied a corner building that had survived 3 decades of urban renewal, its hand-painted sign faded but proud. Mr. Goldsmith himself emerged from the back room when I entered, wiping his hands on a jeweler's cloth. "Mr. Lawson, perfect timing, she's ready for you." The watch lay nestled in black velvet, its restoration complete. The 1952 Omega had belonged to my grandfather, then my father, then me. Each man had worn it through decades of honest work, family celebrations, and quiet moments of reflection. "Beautiful piece, sir. The cleaning brought out details I bet you hadn't seen in years." Mr. Goldsmith lifted it carefully, the gold catching fluorescent light. "Rare model. They don't make craftsmanship like this anymore." "It was worn by my grandfather, then my father, then me," I said, feeling the weight of tradition in my voice. "I hope my son would wear it too." "And he doesn't want to?" The question hit deeper than intended. "We'll find out today." Mr. Goldsmith nodded knowingly, his weathered hands adjusting the watch's position in its presentation box. Family heirlooms carry more than time, don't they? They carry hopes. Sometimes those hopes need to be earned. I selected a velvet-lined gift box from his display case, elegant but not ostentatious. The watch settled inside perfectly, 3 generations of Lawson legacy contained in burgundy velvet. At the gift shop next door, I chose simple but refined wrapping paper, no bows or ribbons, just clean lines and respectability. Back home, I made one final check of the envelope's contents, the villa deed, transfer documents, and a handwritten note explaining my decision. Everything legally sound, emotionally clear. I slipped it into my inner jacket pocket, feeling its weight against my chest like a second heartbeat. My heart medication went into both jacket pockets, along with extras. Today would test more than my resolve. It would challenge every aspect of my 70-year-old body. But some battles couldn't be avoided, only prepared for. The drive to Sunset Inn revealed everything I'd suspected about this wedding's cost. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, Mercedes, BMWs, even a Maserati with temporary tags. Women in designer dresses clicked across marble steps in shoes that cost more than my monthly utilities. This wasn't a celebration of love. It was a display of status funded by my years of misguided generosity. I sat in my modest sedan for a long moment, engine cooling, watching Gerald's world parade past my windshield. The watch box lay on the passenger seat, its velvet surface reflecting afternoon sunlight. The envelope pressed against my ribs with each breath, a constant reminder of what today would bring. Stepping out of my car, I straightened my navy suit jacket and checked my reflection in the driver's window. The man looking back had raised a son, buried a wife, and built a life on principles that seemed increasingly outdated. But today, those principles would speak louder than Gerald's entitled demands. The gift box felt solid in my right hand, the envelope's weight balanced against my heart. Whatever came next, I was ready. The Uber's door clicked shut behind me, leaving me standing in front of Sunset Inn's grand entrance. Crystal chandeliers visible through floor-to-ceiling windows cast rainbow patterns across the marble steps, where women in designer heels navigated carefully upward. Their jewelry caught the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. 50 tables. I counted them methodically through the glass doors, an old engineering habit that surfaced whenever I needed to solve a problem. 10 chairs per table, 500 guests minimum. The venue's price list hung discreetly near the reception desk, and I studied it while signing the guest registry. Premium wedding package, ceremony and reception, $400 per person minimum. The numbers assembled themselves in my mind like blueprints. $200,000 minimum. Harold! Violet Kelly's voice cut through the ambient string music. My aunt approached from near the reception desk, wearing her best navy dress, but looking as overwhelmed as I felt. At 70, she moved more carefully than she used to, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Where's Gerald?" she asked, glancing around the opulent lobby. "Usually the groom greets guests personally, doesn't he?" "Probably getting ready somewhere." I shifted the gift box to my other hand, feeling the envelope's weight against my ribs. "Did you see all this luxury? Where did he get money for this?" Violet's weathered face creased with concern. I wondered the same thing. Ruby mentioned they took out a loan, but Harold, a loan for all this? I studied the floral arrangements lining the hallway leading to the ceremony space. White roses cascaded from gold-trimmed vases, each arrangement probably worth more than most people spent on groceries in a month. The petals looked perfect, expensive, untouchable. A hotel staff member passed nearby, speaking into his headset. "Yes, sir. The Lawson wedding is definitely our premium package. Everything first class, just like they requested. Premium package. Gerald's salary as an IT manager might cover a decent wedding, but this spectacle required resources he simply didn't possess, unless he'd been lying about his income, or unless he'd borrowed against something significant. Something like future inheritance expectations. The ceremony space opened before us, revealing the true scope of Gerald's vision. A string quartet occupied an elegant corner, their instruments gleaming under soft lighting. The altar featured an arch of white roses so elaborate it belonged in a magazine. Even the chairs bore silk ribbons tied in the perfect bows. I found my assigned seat and stopped cold. Table 12. Not front row with immediate family, not even second row with close relatives. Table 12 sat near the back, populated by distant cousins and family friends I barely recognized. Violet found her place card 2 tables closer. Even my 70-year-old aunt commanded more respect in Gerald's seating arrangement than his own father. The envelope pressed heavier against my chest as I settled into my assigned chair. Around me, guests whispered about the venue's elegance, the bride's dress, the obvious expense involved. One woman behind me calculated aloud. "This must have cost more than my house down payment." Gerald appeared at the altar in his tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the successful groom. Ruby floated down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension, her veil trailing behind like spilled silk. They exchanged vows while I watched from my distant vantage point, feeling like a spectator at my own son's life. The photography session followed the ceremony, with Gerald and Ruby posing among those expensive flowers. When the photographer called for family shots, I found myself positioned in the background, barely visible behind Ruby's parents and her sister's children. "Just one more with immediate family," the photographer called. I stepped forward, but Gerald's subtle gesture indicated the shot was complete. I remained frozen mid-step, gift box in hand, while the camera captured Gerald's new family without me. During cocktail hour, I nursed a single glass of champagne and observed. Ruby's laughter carried across the terrace as she spoke with a cluster of young women, her hands gesturing animatedly. "Soon we'll have a wonderful villa," her voice drifted toward me. "Gerald's father promised to give it to him. Can you imagine? Our own estate." The champagne turned bitter in my mouth. Promised to give it to him? When had I made such a promise? Lawrence Franklin, Gerald's college friend, appeared beside Ruby's group, already showing signs of excessive celebration. "Dude, you're so lucky with that villa situation," he slurred toward Gerald, who had joined the circle. "I'd trade anything for inheritance like that." Gerald basked in the attention, accepting congratulations on his good fortune. "Yeah, Dad's been talking about passing it down. Family tradition, you know." Family tradition. As if Gerald understood anything about the tradition of earning what you received. I approached the newlyweds during a brief lull in their receiving line. "Gerald, Ruby, congratulations." Gerald's smile faltered slightly when he saw me. "Thanks for coming," he said, his tone carrying the chill of our last conversation. Ruby's response felt rehearsed, sweetly hollow. "Harold, we're so happy to see you here." But her eyes had already moved past me toward the next well-wisher, someone more important in her carefully constructed social hierarchy. The gift box felt heavier in my hands as I walked away, my decision crystallizing with each step across that expensive marble floor. The ballroom's grandeur multiplied during the reception transition. Staff moved with choreographed precision, transforming ceremony space into dining elegance while guests meandered toward the cocktail terrace. I followed the crowd, gift box secure in my left hand, my right hand unconsciously checking the envelope's presence in my jacket pocket. Table assignments directed guests to their designated social positions, and I located mine with growing resignation. Table 12 sat near the service entrance, far from the head table where Gerald and Ruby held court like royalty. My table mates included distant relatives I rarely saw, except at funerals, and Ruby's distant cousins who seemed equally displaced. The head table commanded the room's attention, elevated on a platform that ensured everyone could witness Gerald and Ruby's happiness. They looked radiant under the crystal chandelier's warm light, accepting congratulations and gifts with practiced graciousness. Ruby's parents, Arthur and Pearl Sims, approached the head table carrying an elegant envelope. Arthur cleared his throat, drawing attention from nearby guests. "Gerald, Ruby, this is from our family." He presented the envelope with ceremony. "A honeymoon package to Hawaii. 2 weeks at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel." Ruby's squeal of delight carried across the dining room. "Dad, Mom, you're so generous." "Gerald, can you believe it? Hawaii. Hawaii. Another $15,000, minimum." I watched Arthur beam with pride at his daughter's reaction, obviously pleased with his gift's reception. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ruby's modest parents had somehow managed what I'd refused to provide. Gerald's acceptance speech flowed smoothly, thanking his new in-laws for their incredible generosity and support. His words carried undertones meant for my ears, emphasizing how others stepped up when family members held back. The MC's voice boomed across the dining room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin our gift presentation ceremony. Our beautiful newlyweds are eager to receive your thoughtful surprises." My stomach tightened as the formal gift-giving process commenced. One by one, family members and friends approached the head table with their offerings. Each gift seemed designed to outdo the previous one. Crystal vases, silver serving sets, artwork that required 2 people to carry. Ruby's childhood friend presented a certificate for couples cooking classes in Tuscany. Gerald's college roommate offered a wine collection valued at several $1,000s. Each gift received enthusiastic applause and grateful embraces from the newlyweds. I remained seated at my distant table, watching this display of competitive generosity while calculating costs in my mind. $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 worth of gifts paraded past my son and his new wife. Yet none of these generous souls had contributed to Gerald's previous 2 weddings. During the dinner service, I barely touched my expertly prepared salmon. The envelope in my pocket seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, reminding me of its presence and purpose. Around me, table mates engaged in polite conversation about the ceremony's beauty and the couple's obvious happiness. "Such a lovely wedding," murmured Mrs. Patterson, a distant cousin from Margaret's side. "Gerald looks so mature now, doesn't he? And Ruby seems perfect for him." Perfect for him. If materialism and social climbing constituted perfection, then perhaps Ruby did suit Gerald's evolved priorities. The gift presentations continued throughout dinner, each offering accompanied by speeches about love, commitment, and bright futures. Ruby's sorority sisters pooled resources for professional photography services. Gerald's work colleagues contributed toward a luxury honeymoon upgrade. I reviewed my own prepared remarks, written on a small card tucked behind my reading glasses. 3 generations of Lawson men had worn the watch now nestled in velvet inside my gift box. Each man had earned his inheritance through decades of responsibility, hard work, and family devotion. Gerald would need to demonstrate those same qualities. Harold Lawson, please come forward for your gift presentation. The MC's announcement carried across the dining room like a judgment call. Conversations quieted as 500 faces turned toward table 12, seeking the groom's father among the distant relatives and forgotten friends. I stood slowly, my knees protesting the movement, gift box balanced in my right hand. The walk toward the head table felt longer than it should, each step carrying me closer to a moment that would define our relationship forever. Gerald's expression shifted from polite anticipation to wary curiosity as I approached. Ruby maintained her practiced smile, though her eyes showed the same calculating assessment I'd witnessed during our few previous encounters. The envelope pressed against my chest, heavier now than when I'd sealed it a week ago. The MC's voice faded as I reached the head table, gift box steady in my hands despite the tremor that had become more pronounced over the past week. Gerald and Ruby sat like throne occupants, elevated above the gathered crowd, waiting for my contribution to their celebration. 500 faces turned toward me, expectant silence replacing the dinner conversation that had filled the ballroom moments before. Camera phones emerged from evening bags and jacket pockets, ready to capture whatever the groom's father might offer. "Harold," Gerald said, his voice carrying across the microphone system. "We're glad you could make it tonight." The formal distance in his tone struck me immediately. Not dad or even father, but Harold, as if I were merely another wedding guest fulfilling social obligations. I set the gift box on the white linen tablecloth, its burgundy velvet surface catching light from the overhead chandelier. "Gerald, Ruby, I brought you something that represents 3 generations of our family." Opening the box revealed the restored Omega, its gold surface gleaming against dark velvet. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the nearby tables as guests leaned forward to examine this obviously valuable timepiece. "This watch belonged to my grandfather, then my father, then me," I continued, lifting it carefully from its resting place. Each man wore it during the most important moments of his life: his wedding day, the births of his children, significant achievements in his career. Gerald's expression softened slightly as he examined the watch's craftsmanship. Even Ruby seemed impressed by its obvious quality and age. "It's beautiful, Harold," Ruby said, her voice carrying genuine appreciation for the first time since I'd known her. "Such a meaningful family tradition." Family tradition, yes. I held the watch up so the entire ballroom could see it clearly. But this tradition comes with responsibility. Each man who wore this watch earned the right to pass it down through decades of hard work, sacrifice, and devotion to family. Gerald's smile faltered as my words took on weight he hadn't expected. "My grandfather built our family home with his own hands," I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. "My father expanded it during the post-war years, while raising 4 children on a factory worker's salary. I modernized it during my engineering career, while supporting my wife and son." The ballroom had grown completely silent now, 500 guests sensing drama unfolding before them. Each generation added value through effort, not expectation. I placed the watch back in its box, closing the velvet lid with deliberate ceremony. "This watch represents that tradition of earning what you receive." Ruby's expression had changed from appreciation to confusion. Gerald's face showed the first signs of concern, though he couldn't yet see where my presentation was heading. "But traditions must be honored by those who hope to continue them," I said, reaching into my inner jacket pocket. "And sometimes, a father must make difficult decisions about inheritance." The envelope emerged from my jacket like evidence in a trial, its white surface stark against my navy suit. Gerald's eyes fixed on it immediately, perhaps recognizing its significance even before I spoke. "Gerald, you've built a beautiful life for yourself," I continued, holding the envelope so everyone could see it clearly. This wedding certainly demonstrates your appreciation for luxury and elegance." Nervous laughter scattered through the audience as guests sensed the compliment's sharp edge. "However, building a life of luxury requires resources," I said, opening the envelope seal with deliberate slowness. "Resources that, according to my calculations, exceed your current earning capacity by a considerable margin." Gerald's face had gone pale. Ruby's smile disappeared entirely as she grasped that this presentation wasn't following traditional wedding gift protocols. "This envelope contains the deed to our family villa," I announced, withdrawing the legal documents. 3 generations of loss and legacy, currently valued at approximately $1.2 million. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Camera phones focused more intently on the unfolding drama. Gerald and Ruby exchanged glances that confirmed my suspicions about their financial expectations. "I had planned to give this property to you as a wedding gift," I continued, the documents heavy in my hands. "Family tradition, as you mentioned during cocktail hour. But traditions require respect, and respect must be earned." The silence in the ballroom felt absolute now, 500 people holding their breath while family drama played out before them. "So, I'm making you an offer, Gerald," I said, meeting my son's increasingly panicked gaze. "Prove that you can appreciate what you haven't earned, and this property will eventually be yours." Gerald found his voice finally. "What do you mean, prove?" I smiled, feeling the weight of 35 years of fatherhood in that moment. "I mean exactly what our family tradition has always required, that inheritance must be earned through responsibility, sacrifice, and genuine respect for those who came before." The envelope's contents rustled as I held them higher, ensuring every guest could witness this moment. "Your trial period begins now. Harold Lawson, please approach for your gift presentation." The MC's amplified voice carried across 500 expectant faces. I stood slowly from table 12, my knees protesting the movement after sitting through the lengthy dinner service. The gift box felt substantial in my hands, 3 generations of Lawson heritage contained in burgundy velvet. The walk to the head table stretched longer than the 30 feet it actually measured. My dress shoes clicked against marble flooring while conversations gradually quieted around me. Camera phones emerged from evening bags and suit pockets, guests sensing something significant about to unfold. Gerald and Ruby sat elevated on their platform like royalty, surrounded by the evening's expensive gifts. Crystal vases caught chandelier light, silver serving sets gleamed on white linen, and certificates for luxury experiences created a shrine to their material success. I reached for the microphone, adjusting it to accommodate my height. The feedback squeaked briefly before settling into silence. 500 faces turned toward me, including Violet's encouraging smile from Table 9, and Arthur Sim's polite attention from the family section. "Dear friends," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I would like to give my son something truly special tonight." Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his expensive Rolex catching light as he crossed his arms. Ruby maintained her practiced smile, though her eyes showed calculating interest in what I might present. "This gift represents more than monetary value," I continued, opening the velvet box with deliberate ceremony. "This watch belonged to my grandfather, then my father, then me. It's witnessed 3 generations of Lawson family history." The restored Omega gleamed under the chandeliers, its gold surface reflecting decades of careful maintenance. Appreciative murmurs rippled through the nearby tables as guests leaned forward to examine the obviously valuable timepiece. "My grandfather wore this watch when he built our family home with his own hands in 1923, I said, lifting the timepiece carefully from its velvet nest. "My father wore it during his wedding to my mother in 1952, and when I was born 3 years later." Gerald's expression had shifted from discomfort to something approaching annoyance. His fingers drummed against the white tablecloth, creating small rhythmic sounds that the microphone amplified slightly. "I wore this watch on my wedding day to Margaret when Gerald was born, and during every significant moment of my engineering career," I continued, holding the watch so the entire ballroom could see its craftsmanship. "Each generation of Lawson men has added to our family's legacy while wearing this symbol of continuity." A woman at table 6 wiped her eyes with a tissue. Several older guests nodded approvingly at this display of family tradition. Even some younger attendees seemed touched by the story's genuine emotion. "Gerald," I said, extending the watch toward my son with both hands, I hope that when you have a son of your own, you'll pass this heirloom to him with the same pride I feel presenting it to you tonight. The gift box felt lighter as I released it, 3 generations of responsibility transferring from my hands to his. Gerald accepted it with obvious reluctance, his face showing none of the gratitude I'd hoped to witness. May this watch remind you of our family's traditions and values, I concluded, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. May it help you remember where you came from and inspire you to live up to the standards set by the men who wore it before you. The audience erupted in appreciative applause. Someone called out, "How beautiful, a true family heritage." Violet dabbed at her eyes with obvious pride, while Arthur Sims nodded respectfully at the touching presentation. But Gerald's face showed only irritation as he stared at the watch in its velvet box. His jaw tightened visibly as the applause continued, and Ruby leaned toward him with what looked like disappointment rather than appreciation. I watched my son's face, waiting for the gratitude I'd hoped to see, but finding something else entirely brewing behind his expensive appearance. Gerald's expression transformed from irritation to open disgust as he examined the watch more closely. The appreciative applause from our guests faded into expectant silence, 500 people waiting for the groom's response to his father's heartfelt gift. "Seriously, Dad?" Gerald's voice carried clearly through the microphone system, his tone sharp with contempt. "An old watch? That's it?" The question hit me like cold water. Around us, guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere. Camera phones that had been recording a touching family moment now captured something else entirely. "Gerald," I began, but he cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Your gift is trash, Dad, just like you." The words exploded across the ballroom like a thunderclap. 500 guests gasped audibly, some covering their mouths in shock at what they'd just witnessed. The crystal chandeliers seemed to dim under the weight of his cruelty. Ruby leaned forward, adding her voice to the attack. "Really, Harold, we were hoping for something more substantial, more modern." Gerald lifted his left arm, displaying the expensive Rolex that adorned his wrist. "I already have a watch, Dad, a real one. I won't wear this ugly old thing." He pushed the velvet box across the gift table dismissively, the precious timepiece sliding among the other presents like discarded trash. The sound of velvet against linen seemed unnaturally loud in the stunned silence. "This is embarrassing," Gerald continued, his voice rising with each word. "In front of all our friends, you bring me some antique junk? What were you thinking?" Violet Kelly rose from her seat like an avenging angel, her 70-year-old frame trembling with indignation. "Gerald, how dare you speak to your father that way?" But Gerald ignored his great-aunt completely, his attention fixed on humiliating me further. "You live like a pauper despite having money, and now you expect us to appreciate your cheapskate gifts?" Ruby nodded agreement, her false sweetness replaced by open materialism. "We've received so many generous presents tonight, Harold. Crystal, silver, vacation packages, and you bring an old watch?" The crowd's reaction rippled through the ballroom like waves. Some guests turned away in secondhand embarrassment. Others leaned forward with horrified fascination at the family drama unfolding before them. Camera phones continued recording, capturing every moment of my public humiliation. Lawrence Franklin, emboldened by alcohol and the spectacle, called out from his table, "Harsh, dude, but I get it. You guys deserve better." Gerald gestured broadly toward the pile of expensive gifts surrounding us. "Look at what Ruby's parents gave us. Hawaii, 2 weeks at the Royal Hawaiian. That's a real gift, not some dusty heirloom nobody wants." My hands had begun to tremble, though whether from age, hurt, or growing anger, I couldn't tell. The microphone amplified my slightly labored breathing as I struggled to process my son's cruelty in front of 500 witnesses. "You raised me to expect better than this," Gerald continued, his voice carrying that familiar tone of entitlement. "But I guess I shouldn't be surprised. This is exactly the kind of disappointing thing you do." Ruby's satisfied smirk confirmed that she'd encouraged this public execution. Her eyes held no warmth, no apology for the devastation her husband was inflicting on his father. The ballroom had grown completely silent, except for the quiet sounds of people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Even the hotel staff had stopped their service, frozen by the shocking display of family cruelty playing out before them. But something had changed inside me during Gerald's brutal attack. The hurt and shock were crystallizing into something harder, colder, My engineering mind began calculating, planning, measuring the precise response this situation required. The envelope in my jacket pocket suddenly felt lighter, its contents transformed from gift to weapon. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, while Gerald basked in his cruel triumph. 500 guests watched, waiting to see if I would retreat in shame or somehow respond to this public devastation. Ruby leaned back in her chair with obvious satisfaction, believing they'd successfully humiliated me into submission. Instead, I reached slowly into my inner jacket pocket. The white envelope emerged like evidence in a courtroom, its formal appearance drawing immediate attention from every guest in the ballroom. Gerald's expression shifted from smugness to curiosity as I held the sealed document where everyone could see it clearly. "This was meant to be your main gift," I said, my voice carrying with ice-cold precision across the silent room. I walked to the gift table with measured steps, placing the envelope carefully among the crystal vases and silver serving sets. The contrast was striking. Their expensive presents looked garish next to the envelope's simple formality. "But after what you just said," I continued, stepping back and folding my hands behind me, "you won't be receiving it." Gerald's face changed as he stared at the envelope. Something in my tone, my deliberate movements, my complete calm in the aftermath of his attack had penetrated his arrogant satisfaction. "What's in there?" he asked, his voice lacking its previous confidence. "More old junk?" Ruby leaned forward, her materialistic instincts sensing something valuable slipping away. "Harold, what could possibly be so important in a simple envelope?" I met her gaze directly, my voice carrying across the microphone system for all 500 guests to hear. "Actions have consequences." Gerald reached toward the envelope, but I held up my hand in a sharp gesture that stopped him mid-motion. "You can look," I said, my tone conversational despite the steel underneath. "But it's no longer for you." The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. Guests who had witnessed my humiliation now watched with fascination as I regained control through mysterious authority. The envelope commanded everyone's attention like a magnet. "What do you mean, no longer for me?" Gerald's voice carried hints of panic as his mind began processing potential consequences of his cruelty. Ruby's eyes fixed on the envelope with hungry intensity. Her materialistic calculations were working overtime, trying to determine what valuable thing her husband might have just cost them through his public attack. "I mean exactly what our family tradition has always required," I replied, adjusting my glasses to look directly at my son. "That respect and inheritance must be earned through character, not demanded through entitlement." Gerald's expensive Rolex caught chandelier light as his hand trembled slightly. The same watch he'd used to insult my grandfather's timepiece now seemed less impressive under the weight of whatever he was beginning to understand he'd lost. "Dad, if there's something important in there—" "There was," I interrupted, my engineering precision cutting through his attempted backtracking. "But you made your position clear. My gifts are trash, just like me. Therefore, you have no use for anything I might offer." Violet Kelly watched from her table with obvious pride at my response, while Arthur Sims looked increasingly uncomfortable as he began to grasp that his daughter had married into a family crisis of significant proportions. The envelope sat among the expensive gifts like a judge among defendants. Its simple white surface contained more power than all the crystal and silver surrounding it, though only I knew the full extent of that power. "You wanted modern gifts," I continued, my voice carrying clearly across the stunned ballroom. "You wanted substantial presents that match your expensive tastes. This envelope contained exactly that." Gerald's face had gone pale as the reality of his situation began penetrating his alcohol-fueled arrogance. Ruby grabbed his arm, her false sweetness completely abandoned in favor of desperate greed. "Gerald, open it," she hissed. "See what's inside." Despite my warning, curiosity overcame caution. Gerald reached for the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady, breaking the seal I'd carefully placed a week earlier. I watched my son's fingers tremble slightly as he pulled out the first document. He had no idea his entire future was about to change. Gerald unfolded the legal papers with hands that weren't entirely steady, his eyes scanning the formal letterhead and official stamps. Ruby leaned over his shoulder, her breath creating small clouds in the air-conditioned ballroom as she tried to read along. "Property transfer deed," Gerald read aloud, his voice carrying through the microphone system to 500 silent guests. Villa on Mulholland Drive, Pasadena, California. His face began changing color as he continued reading, the expensive makeup Ruby had insisted upon failing to hide the pallor spreading across his features. Current market valuation? Gerald's voice dropped to a whisper, but the microphone caught it anyway. $2,800,000. The number hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Ruby's gasp was audible throughout the ballroom, her hands flying to her mouth as the magnitude of what they'd just lost penetrated her materialistic calculations. Gerald's expensive Rolex slipped down his wrist as his hand began trembling uncontrollably. The same watch he'd used to insult my grandfather's timepiece now marked the moments of his own financial destruction. This was... He couldn't finish the sentence. His engineering mind, inherited from me despite everything, calculating the full scope of his loss. $2.8 million. Gone. Because of words spoken in cruel anger. I stood motionless, arms folded across my chest, watching my son's face cycle through disbelief, comprehension, and growing panic. 35 years of fatherhood had led to this moment, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction at the precision of cause and effect. Gerald's breathing became labored as the reality settled into his consciousness like poison. His left hand clutched at his chest, his heart rate accelerating under the stress of sudden, overwhelming loss. The expensive tuxedo that had made him feel so superior minutes earlier now seemed to constrict around his collapsing frame. "Dad," he whispered, the word barely audible even with amplification. "Dad, I didn't know." But his body had reached its limit. The combination of alcohol, emotional shock, and financial devastation overwhelmed his system completely. His eyes rolled backward, consciousness abandoning him as the full weight of his mistake became unbearable. The chair couldn't contain his falling body. Gerald pitched sideways, expensive fabric rustling as he collapsed onto the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the stunned silence. Ruby's scream shattered the quiet like breaking crystal. "Gerald! Gerald! Someone help him!" 500 wedding guests erupted into motion simultaneously. Chairs scraped against marble as people jumped to their feet, some rushing forward, others backing away in shock. The carefully orchestrated wedding reception dissolved into chaos as perfectly dressed guests crowded around my unconscious son. "Call an ambulance!" Olive Ryan shouted from somewhere in the crowd, her voice cutting through the general panic. Lawrence Franklin pushed through the circle of onlookers, his earlier smugness replaced by genuine concern. "What was in that envelope?" he demanded of no one in particular. Arthur Sims appeared with a crystal water pitcher from a nearby table, his face showing the confusion of a man trying to help in a situation he couldn't fully understand. "Stand back, give him air," he commanded, assuming control with natural authority. But I remained exactly where I'd been standing throughout Gerald's collapse, unmoved, unshaken, watching the consequences of my son's cruelty play out with the same methodical observation I'd once applied to engineering problems. Violet Kelly's voice reached me through the crowd noise. "Harold, what have you done?" The question contained no judgment, only curiosity about the scope of justice I'd delivered. My aunt understood family honor better than most, having watched 3 generations of Lawson men earn their place in the world. Through the chaos of shouting guests and Ruby's continued screams, I heard footsteps approaching my position. Arthur Sims knelt beside Gerald's still form, the water pitcher steady in his weathered hands. "This should bring him around," he said, tipping the crystal container toward my son's pale face. I watched the cold water splash across Gerald's features, washing away the last remnants of his earlier arrogance. Soon, he would wake to discover that some mistakes carry permanent consequences, and some words can never be taken back. Through the crowd's noise, I heard Ruby's voice change from concern to something sharper, more calculating, as she began to grasp the full implications of what her husband had just cost them both. The shock of cold water against his face brought Gerald back to consciousness with a gasp that echoed through the ballroom's marble acoustics. His eyes opened to find 500 wedding guests staring down at him, their faces ranging from concern to fascination with the family drama they'd witnessed. "Dad!" Gerald's voice cracked as he spotted me, standing unmoved in the same position. "Dad, forgive me. I didn't know. I never expected such an expensive gift." He struggled to sit up on the wet marble floor, his expensive tuxedo soaked and wrinkled, his perfectly styled hair plastered against his skull. The contrast between his earlier arrogance and current desperation was stark enough to make several guests step back uncomfortably. "Please forgive me. I was a fool." Gerald's voice carried the high pitch of genuine panic as he fully grasped what his cruelty had cost him. $2,800,000, Dad. I had no idea. But Ruby's reaction cut through his pleas like a knife through silk. Her perfectly manicured hands, the ones that had accepted congratulations all evening, now formed fists that pounded against Gerald's chest with surprising violence. "You idiot!" she screamed, her voice carrying none of the sweet composure she'd maintained throughout the reception. "You lost us the villa. $2,800,000. Her blows landed against his soaked shirt with wet slapping sounds that the microphone system amplified throughout the ballroom. Wedding guests backed away further, uncomfortable witnessing such raw fury from a woman who'd seemed the picture of bridal elegance hours earlier. "You destroyed our future," Ruby continued her assault, each word punctuated by another blow. "Our lifestyle, everything we planned." Gerald tried to protect himself while simultaneously reaching toward me with desperate hands. "Dad, please, I understand now. I was wrong. I was completely wrong." I remained motionless, my arms still folded across my chest, watching this display with the same cold precision I'd applied to the entire evening's events. "Words cannot be taken back, Gerald," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system to every corner of the ballroom. "Actions have consequences. You made your choice when you called me trash." Violet Kelly moved to stand beside me, her 70-year-old frame radiating dignified support. "He brought this on himself, Harold. Every bit of it." Arthur Sims helped Gerald to his feet, confusion clear on his weathered face as he tried to understand how a wedding celebration had devolved into family destruction. "Son, maybe if you apologize properly." But Gerald's desperate attempts at reconciliation only emphasized how completely he'd misunderstood the situation. This wasn't about apologies or temporary anger. This was about 35 years of character development that had led inevitably to this moment. "I have a Rolex," Gerald babbled, gesturing wildly at his expensive watch. "But your watch has history, family tradition. I understand now." Ruby had stopped hitting him, but only because she'd shifted her attention to calculating their new financial reality. The dreamy expression she'd worn while discussing future villa plans had been replaced by sharp-eyed assessment of what her marriage was now worth without the inheritance. Lawrence Franklin pushed closer through the crowd, his alcohol-fueled curiosity overriding social appropriateness. "Dude, did you really just lose millions over calling your dad names?" The whispered conversations of 500 guests created a low buzz throughout the ballroom as people processed what they had witnessed. Some older attendees nodded approvingly at my response to Gerald's disrespect, while younger guests seemed more focused on capturing the drama on their phones. Gerald grabbed at my legs with wet hands, trying to anchor me in place. "Don't leave. Don't do this. I'll wear the watch. I'll treasure it. I'll change." But I stepped backward, easily avoiding his desperate grasp. The time for change had been 35 years earlier, when character formation still mattered. Now there were only consequences to be faced. I checked my watch, the simple timepiece that had replaced my father's Omega years ago, and noted that nearly 20 minutes had passed since I'd first approached the gift table, time enough for justice to be served. Ruby's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper as she knelt beside her husband, her words audible only because of the microphone's sensitivity. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" Gerald's response was lost in the general noise of 500 people trying to process the most dramatic wedding reception any of them had ever witnessed. I reached into my jacket pocket one final time, withdrawing the remaining pieces of the legal documents Gerald had dropped during his collapse. The property deed, transfer papers, and notarized certificates that would have made him owner of 3 generations of Lawson family heritage. Holding the papers high above my head, I ensured every guest in the ballroom could see them clearly. The conversations gradually died as 500 pairs of eyes focused on the documents that had caused such devastation. "This paperwork would have made you owner of the family villa," I announced, my voice carrying with crystalline clarity through the sound system. 3 generations of our legacy, legally transferred to your name." Gerald struggled to his feet, water still dripping from his ruined tuxedo, his face showing desperate hope that somehow the situation could still be salvaged. "But you proved tonight that you're worthy of neither respect nor inheritance." I continued, beginning to tear the first document slowly, deliberately, ensuring every rip was visible to the watching crowd. The sound of tearing legal paper echoed through the ballroom's marble acoustics like thunder. Gerald's anguished cry pierced the silence. "No, Dad, don't do this. I'm begging you." But my hands continued their methodical work, reducing each document to pieces that fluttered down onto the gift table among the crystal vases and silver serving sets. 3 generations of family heritage, destroyed as punishment for 30 seconds of cruel words. Ruby's voice rose to a shriek. "This isn't fair! You can't destroy millions of dollars over a few stupid words." I dropped the final torn pieces onto the white tablecloth, their legal authority scattered like confetti among the expensive wedding gifts. The deed that had taken weeks to prepare for transfer was now nothing more than expensive trash. "Goodbye, Gerald," I said, straightening my navy suit jacket and adjusting my tie with the same precision I'd maintained throughout the evening. "Perhaps someday you'll understand the price of words." Violet Kelly nodded approvingly as I began walking toward the ballroom's exit, my dress shoes clicking against marble with steady, unhurried rhythm. Behind me, Gerald's voice broke into something approaching hysteria as the permanence of his loss fully registered. Wedding guests stepped aside respectfully as I passed, creating a clear path through the crowded reception area. Some faces showed shock at what they'd witnessed. Others reflected admiration for a man who defended his dignity against impossible cruelty. The hotel staff maintained professional composure as I reached the lobby, though their eyes followed my progress with obvious curiosity about the drama they'd observed through the ballroom's glass doors. Outside, the California evening had settled into comfortable warmth. Luxury cars still filled the valet parking area, but my modest sedan waited at the taxi stand where I'd arranged pickup for exactly this time. "Rough evening, sir?" the driver asked as I settled into the back seat, finally allowing my shoulders to relax after hours of maintaining perfect posture. "On the contrary," I replied, watching the hotel's crystal chandeliers grow smaller through the rear window. "Tonight, I taught my son the most important lesson of his life." The taxi pulled away from Sunset Inn as Gerald's voice carried faintly through the building's expensive soundproofing, still calling my name in desperate pleas that would never be answered. 3 generations of loss and family heritage had died tonight, but sometimes traditions must end when they can no longer be honored. I'd done what needed to be done, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The villa would remain mine until I died, at which point it would go to charity rather than to a son who'd proven himself unworthy of the legacy 3 generations of men had built with their own hands. Justice, I reflected as Pasadena's lights blurred past the taxi windows, was sometimes cold, but it was always precise. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.